that Prop 314 doesn't yet go into effect because it's tied to a case out of Texas, correct?
That is correct. So we're waiting for that ruling, what I've been told, and based on what I've talked to the governor's office on. So we're kind of in a stalemate until we hear.
Where are you, Sheriff Dannels, on Prop 314, the proposition that was approved by voters in November that allows local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration law, and if crossing the border illegally outside of a port of entry, it can be considered a state crime?
Well, number one, in the America Sheriff's, let me go back here. Let me
Sure.
okay. Let me start by saying the Arizona Sheriffs, we've came together to discuss this. It's an unfunded mandate right now. I know there's some talk in the state to fund that. I've spoke to the governor's office about it. Long story short is it places a real hard burden on local jurisdictions, sheriffs, police chiefs, in the fact that it's unfunded. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have more personnel. So until there's a funding and there's a path forward by each county attorney, by the state, this is a state law, it's not a county law. But I'm also in favor of supporting the will of the people. And how this all works out at the end, I'm not sure. But at the end of the day, we're hoping that there is some relief on the border with the new administration coming in who's prioritized the border. That might take a lot of pressure off us as a local jurisdiction because the international border is a federal problem. I'll be the first to say that and respect that. But once they start committing crimes or we have issues in our communities, we have to stand up as elected officers too and do our part, and we will.
Can I'll ask this, but did you support Prop 314? I mean, I don't know if you were campaigning for it or did you feel like it was the right way to go at the time?
Well, here's how I've said this, Eric, is I understand the spirit behind it, I understand the intent behind it, and I understand the frustration behind it by the Arizona citizens. We've seen some of the worst border activity we've seen in my 4 decades. So I understand all that. But it's a Band-Aid on a triage in the fact that the federal government was absent during these conversations, they've been absent on the enforcement side of it. So we're trying to do something the federal government should be doing. We're taking state money to secure our citizens. I respect that. I respect where the will of the people have on this. But now that we're in a new chapter with a new administration that has focus and priority on this, I don't know where the impact's going to lie. I've shared this with Border Czar Holman, along with some other sheriffs here in Arizona. So we will see what this all works out. Laws have a way of working themselves out for the best of the people, and that's really where I go with it. But I also take an oath of office to support the rule of law, and I'm not going to deviate from that either. For political reasons, opinions, or sensations, we will enforce it. But I just don't know what the impact's going to be right now. And that's where the unknown lies.
Can you kind of provide a little bit more information, a little more context for us about the Arizona Sheriff's Association ask from the state legislature to include $100 million for sheriffs and for counties over the next 2 years, I believe it was?
Well, and that is mainly the influx. You got the fentanyl, you got the crimes related to the border, you got this new law, Prop 314, you have the smuggling law 1328, which states, if you smuggle down the border, you can be charged. And just to give you an idea, when that law went into effect in the latter part of 2022, since that time, we've arrested over 800 smuggler drivers in Cochise County. We've booked over 4,000 people in my county for border-related crimes at a cost of $14 million. So you can see the impact just in one rural county. And there's 15 of us, and those that are truly engaged in the public safety aspect of it and want to work with our citizens and the will of the people in our state. There is a cost there's a price tag to this. And I've heard everything from 50 million to 100 million, talking with the Arizona sheriffs and what we're proposing. I know there's a lot of conversations going on there, and that'll continue until we find what the impact truly is going to be. But we know it's going to cost a price tag. We need to prepare ourselves for that.
I spoke with Sheriff Hathaway in Santa Cruz County, have some different viewpoints than you sometimes on some issues. He says he doesn't want to enforce this because his his words, 95% of his county is Hispanic, and he feels like it could lose trust with his constituents and his citizens. How do you view that?
Well, first of all, you go back all the way to 2010, and the fact that 2010 when they did SB 1070. I mean, that was a thought back then. We're a border community. We have a high Hispanic population also. I've never had anybody come to me and say that concern in my county. I look at it this way. If you're policing properly under the rule of law and you're policing for the people, not the political side of it, then it's not a problem. I've never heard, even when 1070 was an issue, even now, even with the new law 2828 for smuggler drivers, anybody come up and say, hey, we're profiling, or this is a racial issue. I don't buy that. I don't. And let me just say this too, is if we're not engaged in it, and we say, hey, as sheriffs or the executive branch say, hey, we're not going to enforce that law. We're not going to enforce that law. What right do we have to do that? We have to enforce the will of the people, and then we prioritize it within our organizations. If I have an in progress call that somebody's being assaulted or burglary in progress, and then I look over and you got two people that possibly are in a corner that are legally in the country, I'll tell you right now, the people crimes always come first because we have limited resources and infrastructure. So again, it's how we prioritize it, but it's also how we engage with our governor's office, our state legislative folks, and our locals to make sure these laws are applied properly. And I'm not going to deviate from that in any way for political reasons or not.
You say you and your fellow sheriffs aim to enforce the will of the people. Well, Prop 314 was overwhelmingly supported at the ballot box in November. So how can Arizona, if that, and this is an if because it is tied to that law in Texas that is held up in the courts right now, but if it's able to be enforceable, how do you guys go about doing that with the resources you have right now?
Well, that's the biggest challenge. I have a 40-year-old jail that it's just based on our normal crime and based on our border crime under the previous law of smuggling, it's caused great capacity challenges to us. And plus, it's an infrastructure that's failing us, that jail. So again, that's the biggest thing. We have to prioritize. There's no doubt about it. What is most important to the citizens of this county when it comes to what's the biggest threat to them when it comes to incarceration? Second to that, I will say this is sheriffs that are working this, and there's 13 out of 15 sheriffs that are part of the Arizona Sheriff Association. Sheriff Hathaway, Sheriff Nanos out of Pima County, neither of them are. So when I speak, I'm not speaking on their behalf because they're not part of our discussions. They chose not to be involved in these conversations. So as long as they're not involved, this is when I speak, it's the 13 of us that are talking. If we can put our resources together, our message together, and then look and see what's the best approach for our state, working with our state and our governor, I think we're going to be okay on that. It just goes back to the fact that I truly believe that the impact in my county will be minimum compared to the impact up in the northern counties. Let me explain why I say that. Is if I find somebody that's illegally here in the country, I have suspicion, I call Border Patrol, we have a plethora of them. They come to my county, they address it, they take them. They take them. The only time we'd enforce that law is if there's an issue with Border Patrol not taking them or they're not available and this person is a threat to the community. At that point, we will then address the crime because that becomes a priority. I'm never going to release somebody that is a threat to our community when there's a law that says you can hold them. I'm not going to pose that risk to my citizens.
Let me just follow up on that. You say that's the only time you would enforce a Prop 314 measure.
It's the only time I see that's feasible. And the fact, let me explain why I say that, Eric, is I have Border Patrol. Border communities have Border Patrol at our disposal, and we're at their disposal. So why would I jail's already overcapacitated right now, and then start saying, hey, you're here for immigration, you and your children, let's go ahead and throw you in jail. That's a whole different story when Border Patrol can address it right then and there. And with the new administration saying, we're going to address this, we're going to hold accountability on it, at that point, I would yield to the federal government to do their job. If that's not available and we have a threat to the community, you bet we'll enforce that. And I think every sheriff would agree on that. We're taking the worst of the worst when it comes to these people we're dealing with. But Border Patrol, if they're available or they're a murder suspect from another country or they're from a gang, you bet we're going to address that. We're never going to turn our back on our citizens.
So As it stands right now, Prop 314 is not yet in effect. But Sheriff Dannels, do you have the capacity and the resources at your disposal right now in Cochise County to enforce it if it does ever get to that point where it does indeed become law here in Arizona?
We have minimal resources already. We have the resources to allocate a county, which has been historically, this is the amount of people that live here on an average to include the amount of crime we have. That's what I have. So to address everybody coming across the border that comes across illegally, do I have the infrastructure? The answer is no.
Two last questions, and I always thank you for your time, sir. Thank you for helping all of us and our viewers understand this a little better. As it stands right now, Prop 314 is in a bit of a holding pattern, correct?
Right.
So it's dependent on a Texas law, but that could be potentially held up in the courts for maybe even years to come. So where do you go from here? You guys can't afford to be in a holding pattern for years, I imagine.
Well, and that's where we have to rely on our attorney general. We have to rely on our county attorneys, the respective county attorneys. Everything we do has got legal oversight. And that's where I rely on that, because if a prosecutor or an attorney general or the state says, hey, we're not giving you a penny for this, you're on your own, it makes it very, very difficult. And what are you saying to the people of this state that overwhelmingly passed it? This is a pinch bite to the sheriffs. Let me just say that. And that's how the Arizona sheriffs felt this too, is this is a feel-good bill with the right intent by the people. But at the end of the day, if we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the funding, and we don't have legal support net, where do sheriffs go? I mean, we have to work in a partnership and a cohesive, a collective effort of the criminal justice system. We just can't go rogue on this. We have to be very smart how we handle this. So it's a dominoes effect within the criminal justice system that I'll work within.
Finally, what's your message to people who may be watching this and wondering what happens now with Prop 314 kind of lingering out there?
Yeah, it's a summary message is number one, watch the administration at the federal level. And let's see what they do. We've shared this with the borders are Mr. Tom Holman. He's well aware of what's going on in this state. He's wants to partner with sheriffs in Arizona. We will see where that takes it. I think you'll see a different look on the border in the next 4 years. Number two is let's look at the state level. Let's see what our state does when it comes to funding. Let's see what the infrastructure brings to us. And let's see what pressure is relieved on both sides. And at the end of the day, your sheriffs and police chiefs in our communities will be there for them. I know I speak directly for myself and my team. We'll continue to always do what's legally right to make sure it's done right.